Welcome back to Big Asian Energy. I have a question for you. Have you ever had a time where you've had a great idea and you wish that you know exactly how to say it and be seen for the idea, but find yourself holding back? And, I personally, I can tell you right now, I have had so many moments like that where personally I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out there and change the world with this amazing thing. And then when I'm either in the room or on stage or something like that, something pulls me back. And then later on, I'm like, oh man, like somebody else is going to take credit for that. Well, you know what? Good news is today I have a guest here who is going to change all that for you. She is a keynote speaker, the author of Unforgettable Presence, Guessing, Gain Influence, and Catapult Career. And she teaches courses at Stanford Continuing Education, LinkedIn Learning. This is Lorraine Lee. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you, John. So excited to be here.
Woo! Okay. So I know that you've developed your own frameworks and you've worked with companies like Zoom, Amazon, Cisco, McKinsey, and you've been like a LinkedIn top voice. You've been, a founding editor at companies like LinkedIn, Prezi. You've been featured everywhere from like CNBC, Bloomberg. I could go on for a while, but I really got to ask, especially for someone who, like myself, grew up in a culture. I don't know if this is something you relate to. I grew up in a culture where being seen wasn't always the easiest thing. I would love to hear how you came to write this book, develop your framework, and this whole thing. Can you give us a little background?
Of course. Well, I feel like that story that you told at the beginning is definitely something that I can relate to as well. And it took a lot of trial and error and just things not working out as I planned or wanted them to sort of end up where I am now. And so I was approached by a publisher about writing a book. I didn't necessarily know what the book would be about, but as I started reflecting on the things that I talk about on LinkedIn, the things that I speak on, the topics that I speak on at organizations, I realized that this concept, unforgettable presence, and your professional presence, and being really intentional about how and where you are seen is such an important thing to take charge of,
Mhm.
especially in our modern way of working now, where many of us are hybrid, many of us are remote only, and it is so much harder to really stand out, to capture people's attention. We're all so distracted. There's so much going on.
Mhm.
And I realize this book is really important. It's the thing that I wish I had, earlier on in my career to
For
get
sure.
my ideas heard, to get that visibility, to really fulfill that potential that I knew I had in me, but others weren't seeing. And so I'm just so excited for this book to go into the world.
I'm so excited too. And I'm so excited to learn this. Okay, so the question I want to jump in with, because when I was growing up, I always thought this is something that you're just born with. Like some people are just born charismatic, some people are just born unforgettable. And then other people kind of like the normies, we just kind of chill in the back of the room. So is this which version are you? Were you one of the people who just had this natural charisma, or is this something you learned?
Something I learned. I mean, I wish I had it naturally, and I'm totally with you where you see those people and you're just like, oh my gosh, like everyone loves them. People are just, they're magnetic. But I learned over time, this is a skill you can learn, which I hope gives people hope who are in maybe a similar situation. Like I'm introverted, for example. So like
Mhm.
people who are more introverted, who are not used to being in the spotlight or to getting that recognition, it is possible to learn all those skills. And,
Mhm.
my book is a lot of practical, tactical frameworks and advice because it is something that you can learn step
Mhm.
by step.
Okay. So can we just jump in and get that question out of the way? How do we become and how do we develop that unforgettable presence?
So the first thing to think about or to know is that the definition of presence has changed. And so I'd be curious, John, for you, like if you hear me say presence, you probably automatically think executive presence, how I show up in a room. When I
Mhm.
say presence, that's what comes to mind for most people. And what presence really is now is how and where you are seen. And it's
Hmm.
not something that is just reserved for executives or for senior leaders. It's about our presence in all different aspects of our career, in our day to day, both small interactions, big interactions, face to face, not
Hmm.
face to face, and being intentional about that. That really helps contribute to our overall presence, our overall reputation,
Mhm.
versus maybe that one sort of small thing that has a lot of maybe coded meanings and just other sort of definitions that are not always feeling approachable for people who are not the stereotypical definition of someone who is in a leadership position. But
Hmm.
presence is really that new how and where we are seen definition. And then we have to be really intentional and thoughtful about each piece of it.
That's super interesting. So when you're saying how we are seen and where we are seen, let's start with how. What does presence mean and how we are seen?
When you have a strong presence and a strong reputation, you want to be known as someone who is reliable, who does great work. You want to be seen as a really strong coworker, a leader.
Hmm.
When you think about the where piece, it's sort of like that analogy, like if a tree falls in the forest, but no one's there to hear it, like, did it happen? Have you heard of
Yeah.
that before?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh
So,
for sure. Yeah.
so it's kind
So
of
so
like,
so did it happen?
yeah. So it's like if you work really hard, but no one
Yeah.
sees it and you're not seen
Yeah.
in the right places,
Right.
what's it all for? Like, what's
Yeah.
the point? So you have to still have that foundation. You have to do the good work and know how to execute.
Right.
And you also need to know how to make sure that your work is being seen. You need to make sure that you're being seen in the right places. For example, perhaps there's a specific meeting where like all the senior leaders meet. You want to make sure that your work is being visible there. Even something as simple as Slack. Like there was when I was at my last company, Prezi, there was a Slack channel called Senior Leaders. I did not know that this existed before I became a senior leader. I wish I had known, but like
It's
there's
like a
places like
secret room.
yeah, there's places like that that
Yeah.
exist, and you want to make sure that you're part of those conversations, you're in those rooms, and that or at least that your work is being socialized and shared out by your manager in those right places.
So how do you do that for all the people who are not in those super cool clubs that they don't get to be in? How do we get ourselves talked about and recognized? Because the only thing I can think of is just like go out there and like endlessly self promote and talk about how amazing you are, which just makes me feel so much ick.
It is super uncomfortable to frame it like that, and I think a lot of people do think of it like that, and that's why
Mm,
it like turns people off so much. The first thing I would say, and a theme throughout the book, is to really become the CEO of your own career. So to take
mm,
charge, to know that you can control your destiny to a certain extent by really being your own best advocate. So sometimes it's as simple as asking your manager and like letting them know that this is something you want. I talk in my book this story. I had this coworker, and she was so well liked. She did great work. She had been at the company for a while, hadn't gotten promoted. I always sort of wondered in the back of my head, like, what's going on? Like, why hasn't she gotten promoted yet?
mm.
And then she comes into the office one day. It's promotion cycle. She's like, I got promoted. I'm like, oh my gosh, great! Like, what happened? Like, what was the story? She's like,
Hmm.
I just had to tell my boss that I wanted to get promoted. He
What?
just he just like didn't think that that was something I wanted. And
What?
that was like such like a mind-blowing moment because I was like, oh my gosh, like of course me being ambitious, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's obvious I want a promotion. Like, doesn't everyone want a promotion? But
Yeah.
even if your manager is really good, again, like we're also busy with our own thing. We have our own problems, our own challenges. To simply
Hmm.
ask for it and to let other people know that this is something, and don't ask just once, but mention it tactfully
Hmm.
multiple times. That can be like the best first step.
Oh wow. So like, okay, I'm trying to think of it as tactical as I can. So for somebody who's listening at home who has got like, all right, I'm at work, I'm working hard, I know my work is good or at least not bad. Um, and how do I get seen in it? Is it like I'm trying to imagine, is it literally like just going up to your boss and being like, hey boss, just letting you know if there's any good opportunities or promotions. It can't be that simple, right? Like,
Yeah,
is there a
yeah.
way to frame your work?
Yeah, I think there's some strategy behind that, right? So you'll go up to your boss, maybe give them a heads up, like, "Hey, I would really like to talk about my career here.
Mhm.
I love the work that I'm doing. I really want to grow in my position. My goal is to get promoted in, the next review cycle, 2 years,
Mhm.
whatever it is. Can we come up with a plan together, or can I come up with a plan and review it with you to figure out the milestones that I need to
Mm,
hit in order to get to that point?"
mhm,
Having something like that also really holds the manager accountable, right? If you hit all the things, they can't be like, "Oh,
mm,
sorry, like, it's not going to happen because they said that that's what you needed to do."
mhm,
So getting really tactical and having a roadmap, I think, is a really great first step. And then again, like what goes into the promotion process?
mm,
Who are the people in the room who are deciding? Because it's often not just your manager saying, oh, I think Lorraine should get promoted, or I think John should get promoted. It's, a certain number of the leadership team all fighting for their own people and then figuring out there's only
Mhm.
so many openings and raises and things that they can offer, making sure that your manager is equipped with all your wins, positioning you correctly. And so not just going up to them a month before reviews, but 6 months ahead, a year ahead, and making sure that
Mhm.
you are preparing along the way, and then also building those relationships with those stakeholders and other people who have influence in that room.
So, like, thinking about the people who all have a role to play in your career
Mhm.
trajectory, like not just your direct manager, but all the people who are part of that decision making and building relationships with them. And when I'm thinking building relationships, I think that's a tough one, especially for the introverts in the room, right? It's just like, I just want to show up to work, do a good job, and then get noticed.
Yep.
How would you go about getting those relationships, getting that recognition?
One of the things that I talk about a lot is the power of small talk.
Okay. Oh,
And even though
sorry. I
I
we need a moment because already my whole body is like, ugh.
yeah, yeah. So that's what most people's reaction, right? So
I hope that's not like offending you, but like it's tough. Like small talk is hard. We don't think about
hard,
this.
hard.
Yeah.
But the thing about small talk is it's hard and it feels annoying and just boring because
Mhm.
most people do small talk on autopilot.
Yeah.
So, like, we're passing each other in the office, like, "Oh, hi, John. How was your weekend?" "Oh, it was
Yeah.
great. How was yours?" "Great,
Yeah.
thanks." And just sort of like,
Yeah.
like,
I went hiking this past weekend. It was a good
yeah, just
time. Yeah.
it's just like kind of bland.
Ugh.
Now, if you push yourself a little bit, small
Mm.
talk is actually one of the most important ways that we build relationships and build rapport and bond with our coworkers. And that requires turning off your autopilot mode when it comes to small talk.
Mm.
So instead of just how are you? Asking questions that I already can predict what your answers are going to be.
Mm.
Push a little bit beyond that, right? So instead of how are you, I might ask, oh, John, like, what are you excited to be working on? Like, we haven't caught up in a while. Like, I want to
Mm.
hear what's going on with you. And then you have like that phrase excited, which primes people to think positively, right? And that's going to make you like pause for a second and be like, oh, I have to think about my answer, right? And so I'm
Mm.
going to learn a little bit more about you through that.
Mhm.
And there's this concept as well called conversational threading, which is very powerful, which requires you to pull on threads that people give you or give other people threads.
Mm.
So, John, if I ask, how was your weekend? Instead of just saying, oh, my weekend was good, you might say, oh, it was really exciting. I ran 3 miles and I also was able to celebrate my niece's birthday. And
Mm.
it was so cute. There were so many kids running around. And then I can pull on one of those threads and
Mhm.
dig a little bit deeper, right? So it requires me to actively listen to you and actually think
Mhm.
again about engaging in a conversation like, oh, how old is your niece turning? Do you have photos from the event? Right. And
Mhm.
now I know you have a niece. I can
Mhm.
ask you about her in the future.
Mhm.
And that way, these small moments of small talk over time build those stronger relationships.
Mm. Okay. So I've been building these relationships with my manager, Bill, and now
Yeah.
we know that, we both love baseball. I know nothing about baseball. We both love code plunging, and like he has a niece
So like,
who's
yeah.
about to graduate high school. All
Yeah.
great. At what point do I say, "All right, Bill, promote me"? Let me tell you about why I'm awesome and better than all of these other suckers in the room. I'm totally not going to say that,
Yeah.
but I deserve the promotion. I think that's the hard part. How do you make that transition?
I think it's all sort of integrated. So
Mm.
you should always be getting to know your manager on a personal level. I mean, you don't have to go so deep, but relationships are built by knowing personal things about one another. And so
Mhm.
sharing those in your one-on-ones, etc., like you will build a relationship that way.
Mhm.
And when it's time, when you feel like you're ready or it's time for that promotion, that's part of your one-on-one conversations. Like you start off with the small talk and you know each other, and your boss Bill knows about like your struggles and your strengths and all these things. um, I wouldn't overthink too much about like the timing. I think giving your boss a heads up, like this is
Mhm.
something you want to talk about, and then approaching it like how I said before.
Mhm.
The fact that your boss knows these things about you and knows more
Mm.
about who you are as a person is only going to help your case because Bill likes you and Bill's going to
Sure.
want to advocate for you when
Mm.
that time comes.
Right. Now that last thing you said, Bill likes you. That's a big one. we all want to be liked. Everybody wants to be liked. Who
Yeah.
doesn't want to be liked?
Yeah.
So aside from our small talk, is there anything that builds, because to me, I always think of it from how do we build deeper and more genuine relationships, right? And that's the part that I struggle a lot with people with small talk is on a personal level, the reason why small talk bores me is because I like to get deeper. And I think psychologists have kind of developed like there's this like three layers of relationships that we have, right? The first level is just that level of who am I, who are you, and that level. And then we dive deeper into values, goals, and relationships. And then we dive deeper in that into identity. So these are the kind of three levels. And not everyone plays that level, as you said. You don't have to be besties with your boss. You don't have to be like trauma dumping and starting your day with vulnerability dumps. But
Yeah.
I mean, hey, if you want to be, I'm not
Or
going
you
to stop
can.
you. That could be the environment where you start your day and being like, well, my sex life has been a little bit lacking lately. But I think my question here is two things. One is how do you build that likability? And two is when do you start introducing this? Because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. That they think, oh yeah, I'll start asking for promotional levels up once I've kind of earned my keep, right? Is there a time, or is it like, no, 2 months in, drop the bomb and be like, let's create a plan?
If you're new to a company, probably 2 months in, I think is a little fast, right?
Yeah.
They hired you for
Yeah.
and
Like, dude, you haven't finished orientation yet.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, you're still in orientation.
let's see if you fit it. You can do your current job first.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, but I think like you said, like trust is such a big part of our workplaces too. And
Yeah.
so once you feel like you've earned that trust and that you've built some of those relationships, I think, it doesn't necessarily have to be a year. It can be sooner than that. If like, let's say they hired you and
Mm,
you're like, oh, I'm actually like really outperforming, or the role maybe wasn't quite what we thought, or things have changed. Like,
mm,
I think you use your best judgment. You can, again, check in with your manager. Like, if you're
mhm,
like unsure, hopefully there's someone who's on your side and you feel like you have that open relationship with. But I
mhm,
wouldn't say like, oh, it has to be a year, it has to be like a year and a half, anything
mhm,
like that. Yeah. So,
mm. Once you feel like there's a little bit more depth of understanding, you kind of build a little bit more trust.
yeah, exactly.
Now, do you mind if I take a quick left turn here? Because there's something behind this that I think is harder for some people than others. I'm just going to be honest. If I was telling myself this at 20 years old, and that's what this whole podcast really is like, what advice would I give myself when I was 20? I think I would hear this and be like, that sounds great. And it's terrifying. Because
Mhm.
what if I don't think I'm good enough to be claiming that? What if I don't think I'm good enough to be stepping into that role of claiming this is what I want, this is what I deserve? Because it's the worst question that I think
Yeah.
would have been hard for myself. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it is about having people externally from you give you that boost of confidence. There's someone who I interviewed in my book. She was an executive at Google, and she always thought she was going to be a manager, like
Hmm.
just kind of just moving along the path. And
Hmm.
she had a mentor who said to her, "Oh, I think you're going to become an executive like
Oh, wow.
at Google," and then
Nice.
she was able to see it within herself. So sometimes, of course, ideally, you have the confidence within
Hmm.
you. But yeah, when
Hmm.
you are starting off your career, it is kind of hard. You don't have so many things you can point to or the experiences that might
Mm,
inform, what you kind of see in yourself for the future. But having those mentors, having those advocates, people who see potential in you and can help you see that in yourself or to spark ideas, right? Like I had
mm,
some when I was writing this book, someone in a sort of joking way, but an old colleague had messaged me and he's like, he saw my LinkedIn Learning course came out and he's like, when's the book coming out? And I was like, book? Oh, maybe. Like I never thought about it. So sometimes having that support network, the right people around you can be really critical if you are not necessarily seeing that in yourself, to have that push of confidence, that push of support to help you feel okay reaching for that next big thing.
mm. So having and building those relationships with the people around you to not just bolster, I would say, bolster you on a physical level, as in like telling other people about you and your reputation, but also be a champion for you.
Yeah, and I think,
Mm.
one of the things I talk about in my book is the difference between mentors and sponsors.
Okay.
I think so many of us are over mentored and fewer of us are sponsored. So over-mentored, under-sponsored. A mentor is someone who can coach you, share their advice from their own careers, share their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
A sponsor is someone who's going to really advocate for you. They're going to open doors for you. They're going to put your name up for projects. They're going to mention your name when you're not in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so at different points in our career, we need both or one of each of these types of individuals in our lives. So also like knowing that I think can be really valuable too. Like if you're younger in your career, I don't know, maybe a mentor at that stage in your career makes sense. Or you're trying to reach that next level, you want to become a manager. Oh, having a sponsor, someone who's maybe not my direct manager, but sponsor in that promotion conversation is going to be really critical at that point. So I think that's just a nuance that I like to talk about.
I love that. How do you go about finding and getting someone who wants to champion and sponsor you?
A lot of it does come down to relationships, which I can see as a theme already coming up multiple times during our conversation. But it really comes down to relationships because, again, like people want to help people they like, people want to help people that they see potential in. So this is not always something that is going to, and often not going to be something that happens overnight. It's going to be, hey, someone's been watching your work, or it's someone you've been in touch with for a long time, giving them updates, staying in touch, following through when they suggest like, oh, read this article or listen to this podcast. And building those relationships is really going to make it more likely that if and when that time comes where you want to formalize the relationship, they will be there to say yes. But let's say you see someone at your company, you're like, oh my gosh, this person would be an amazing sponsor for me, but I don't know them. Letting them know your goals, again, taking ownership of your career, reach out to them, ask them for a coffee chat, and make sure it's easy for them to schedule and that you come with an agenda and that you give them a heads up what you want to talk about. Like reaching out like that, cold outreach works fine, right? But you want to make sure again you're doing it strategically and with intention. So those are the two paths you can take. And then one other thing I would say is like you don't always have to find people inside your company. And there's people in our communities, our churches, our volunteer groups, like tons of communities that we're in who can potentially act as a mentor or sponsor, again, at different points in our lives and our careers, and can provide that extra support that we need.
I love that. So finding people along the way who we think could be good and reaching out to them, building that same thing, relationship. At the end of the day, I feel like, as you said, everything comes down to relationship, people, people, people.
Yes,
Now,
100%.
you mentioned earlier talking about how in our sort of like post-COVID slash work from home slash like everyone is talking in front of a screen world, it's important that it's not just about how you present, but also where you present. How do we get seen in our virtual presence?
There's two things that I think are the most important to start off with. The first is your virtual presence and how you show up on camera. And it might sound you're like, okay, we've been doing this for years. Like, I know how to show up on camera. No,
Yeah.
so many people still don't know how to show up on camera. Like, I'm still going into companies to talk about this. And then, like, there's these sessions where I'll do like a quick review of, live coaching of people's virtual presence or video
Yeah.
presence.
Yeah.
And like, almost everyone has something that they can adjust, And so, most people like they're like too small. So they're like their head's down here, or they're like too close, their head's ginormous, right? And so making sure that your framing is correct, that you have a curated background, that you are using your hands, that you're making eye contact, like again, like small things, but have a really big impact in how others perceive you and then how you're showing up in this virtual space. So virtual presence, video presence is one that I feel like is just such a missed opportunity for a lot of people, but has a lot of outsized impact, positive impact on your career and how others perceive you. The second thing I think that is super valuable is being active on LinkedIn and building a LinkedIn presence. I was a founding editor at LinkedIn, so I was one of the people who kind of brought and introduced content to the platform, and it's been so cool to see the transformation from 2013 I think it was to now, and just like how much content is on there on the platform. And it can feel sometimes loud on LinkedIn, but there's data that shows that only 1% of LinkedIn's monthly active users are posting. So there's
Wow.
like a lot of opportunity there for you to not just build your profile, make sure you have a strong foundation as part of your LinkedIn presence, but make
Mm,
sure that your content and your comments and the insights that you're putting out into the world contribute to your presence. And,
mm,
contrary to what maybe more traditional companies think, when you can show that you have a strong LinkedIn presence, it will only benefit you, I think, at your current organization. People will see you as a leader. They'll be like, wow, like John's,
mm,
putting his face out there. He's like speaking
mm.
at, at places, and you really can find your voice and confidence. And I would say this happened for me as well, like through posting content on LinkedIn. And
Mm.
LinkedIn is really I like to say, our ultimate virtual office. So if you're
Mm.
not there, people are gonna be like,
Where are you?
where's John? Does he exist?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what kind of postings do you usually suggest for somebody who might be new to all this? Because it can be intimidating.
Gosh, it's totally intimidating. And even when I worked at LinkedIn, I was nervous to post. It's like it's tied to your professional identity. You don't want to sound stupid. You're like,
Yeah.
some people are maybe worried, like, oh, I'm gonna be cringe, like I'm not like influencer on LinkedIn. But I break it down into three categories, topic categories to start. So, personal, educational, professional. Personal, obviously, telling your own experience, your personal stories. Educational, I'm going to teach you how to have an unforgettable presence. I'm going to teach you how to have a big Asian energy. I'm going to talk to you about, your video presence. And
Yeah.
then professional, there's something happening in the industry, in workplace news, and I'm going to add some commentary on it.
Mm.
Now, of course, posting on LinkedIn can, like you said, like it's very intimidating. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't, it's just scary.
Yeah.
So, what I like to recommend first before posting is two approaches. So, the first, if you see an article that is interesting to you, simply sharing the article. You don't have to say anything about it, but post the article. Just sort of get used to like having your name out there in the world.
Mm.
Maybe you take like a
Right.
sentence or two from the article, highlight something. That can be your first step. Or commenting is I love commenting. I feel like it's such an underrated way to contribute your insights to LinkedIn. And I always say comments equal content. So in fact, actually, I just commented on someone's LinkedIn post the other day. He's huge on LinkedIn, and he saw my comment and he was like, hey, this is like amazing. Can we make a post out of this? And then we did a
Oh, wow.
collaboration, and that was like through my comment, right? So
Mm.
people will notice you. You will build a following that way, and people will come to know what your area of expertise is. And it's just a less, maybe less out there way to share your thoughts if you're
Mm.
feeling a little bit hesitant.
That's perfect. Do you have any kind of like, I think that's a really great idea. I love what you said about comment is content.
Yeah.
Do you have any standard operating procedures for people? Like, how often should they be posting? How active should they be? And
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, it's because exactly as you say, like, where is that line between personal, like too personal, and still professional?
LinkedIn recommends posting 4 times per week, which I feel
Hmm.
like for someone new starting off, like way too much. Like that's burnout. Like that you're not gonna be able
Yeah.
to sustain.
Oh my
Like
gosh. Yeah.
that's not possible. Or I mean it's possible, but you're not gonna enjoy it. So I like to say just like set the bar super low. Like I'm gonna post once this month.
Hmm.
Great. You're gonna hit that, no problem. Okay, maybe I can do twice a month. And you sort of build on that and you build a consistent practice over time.
Hmm.
So start small. It's
Hmm.
no problem.
Hmm.
And what was the other part of your question?
So
Best
cadence and
practices
finding,
or
yeah, best practices.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, so for commenting best practices, I would recommend aiming for comments that are about 15 words in length. So less of the like, I agree, congratulations, which are nice.
Yeah.
But you don't want that to be all your comments. Like instead, like, I agree. Have you thought about this? I agree. I would
Mm.
add these three things. You want people, again, presence, all your touch points. They see that. They're going to form some sort of impression, learn more about you through that comment.
Mhm.
Now, for posting, in terms of like what's too personal, I think it's a use your best judgment thing. Like with COVID, we got a lot more personal and like showed behind the scenes and the struggles that we were
Mhm.
having. But it is a professional platform, right? So there's
Mhm.
a difference between a post that you might make on Facebook and a post that you make on LinkedIn. So I
Yeah.
think personal is fine. Like I share a lot of personal stories as it pertains to my professional life.
Right.
And people do like hearing personal stories on LinkedIn. Like I think those are the types of posts that often do best, or you at least start
Mm.
off with personal and then get into whatever educational professional afterwards. But I think if as comfortable as you feel, and again, it takes some time to build that confidence, to build your voice, personal stories are really key.
Got it. And you mentioned, I love that about 15 words is a good kind of like rule of thumb, let's say. Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that, kind of like hit into it. Um, a few times start based on comfort. And I think one key question I think a lot of people have is, I don't know what to say. And the I don't know what to say problem, by the way, I know is just as valid in real life as it is online. So what do we say when we're on LinkedIn? Do we just like comment on what we do in our jobs, or is there something a little bit deeper than that?
I think people put a lot of pressure on themselves to come up with completely unique ideas
Mhm.
or to be like, I have to be the top expert in this thing to be able to talk about it. And really, I think what does best, again, is like a personal story, a challenge, just something from your own life
Mhm.
experience, your own lived experience. And in addition to that, like, you don't have to be the expert. Like, again, and
Mm.
here we are talking about relationships again. Like, people I always say that there are so many quote unquote competitors out there. There's so many people who are talking about the exact same thing that you do. So there's people who talk
Mhm.
about presence and public speaking and LinkedIn and all the other things that I talk about. But why people might want to follow me or listen to
Mhm.
me versus that other person is because they feel connected to me. It's that relationship
Mm. Yeah.
piece. And yeah, it's just you don't put so much pressure on yourself to feel like you have to be the utmost expert. It's you have your own lived experience. You are an expert in something, whether it's leading a team, like you've been a
Mhm.
manager for a few years,
Sure.
even if you're just starting off your career. Like I think a lot of early career folks are like, but I don't have a lot of experience yet. Like, what do I talk about?
Yeah.
Anything. You can talk about the process of applying for jobs, like what you
Mm.
learned. You can talk about what you've learned from internships before. You can talk about like what you learned from talking to a mentor. I
Mm.
mean, Gen Z and the younger generations have so much they can share around like social media, right? Like best practices that like I'm sure like older people might not know about. So yeah,
Mm.
like the world is your oyster and just don't put that pressure on yourself. We all have something that we can talk about and know about from our experiences.
Mm. I think that because I used to struggle a lot with this as a person who creates content. I think that it can be tough because trying to come off polished, especially for
Yeah.
me. I grew up in like an Asian family where that was a part of, I'm not gonna say that like looking like a perfect person was a big pressure, but there
Yeah.
was an element of it where I think trying to appear polished is such a big part of saving face or having face, right?
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was hard to share, especially personal stories, especially right now. The big focus is on, can we share your wounds and your scars as well as the beautifully made up gardens, right? That was a terrible mixed metaphor, but you see where I'm going at. So my question is, for people who might struggle to feel like, I feel like trying to present these sides of me feels false or
Uh-huh.
fake, how
Yeah.
do we address that? How do we find ourselves authentic, but also actively sharing our best selves?
I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where
Mhm.
on the platform, yeah, sometimes there's this pressure like I have to be perfect or I have to come across a certain way or I have to only talk about this or only talk about that.
Mhm.
And to give yourself grace to know that this is a learning process, like as you post more, that consistent practice, it will probably, I mean, I know it did for me and for many others I work with
Mhm.
it. You start feeling more comfortable sharing your stories. And again, like
Mhm.
if you're not so comfortable just putting yourself out there, like in a post, like you try commenting and you build those relationships and you will see that positive reaction from the community wanting to learn from you, wanting to hear more from you, wanting to connect with your story. And that is I guess like social encouragement to get
Mm.
out there. But I think to not feel pressure that you have to come across a certain way or talk about a certain thing to start
Mm.
because everyone's on their own journey and to not feel pressured by that. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Finding your own balance, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be curious for you, John, like how do you balance it now?
I don't know if I can answer that
Work in progress still?
like I think for me, I think I'm always a work in progress because it is true, right? Like it used to be one at one point, my rule of thumb was share the scars, not the wounds, because I don't want to bleed over other people.
Sure.
And if I'm processing something, I'm still kind of coming to terms of it. It's hard for me to share a story that is also a lesson. And like, how do I create value for people? And now I'm at a point where I'm kind of just free flow. Sometimes I'll just share what I'm going through, and sometimes I'll share what's not because they're all part of me.
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest shift that I went through in the past few years is landing on the fact that if I'm comfortable in standing in the firmness of who I am, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because some people, no matter what, are going to see me and they're going to have an opinion of me that I won't share. In other
Yeah.
words, there are going to be people who judge me for who I am just because I'm me.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then there are going to be people who judge me as positively for the exact same thing. Like I'll make a post or I'll make a story,
Yeah.
and sometimes it just drop flat and like just goes on in crickets, and I'm like, cool. And then I'll make one where it's like the comments, it's like a war zone, right? Like just people like they all have their own ideas. And at the end of the day, I think we're all just mirrors for each other anyway.
Yes.
So it's not really up to me to try to figure out if I'm coming off polished or not. It's up to me to
Yeah.
figure out whether I feel grounded in what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. I mean, predicting the algorithm, like
Oh my God.
assuming like you need to have high engagement, like that's just a hard game to win. So be
Yeah.
authentic to yourself, do what
Yeah.
makes you feel good and happy and allows you to connect with people and meet new people. And again, like you can meet so many amazing people through LinkedIn. It's like I
Yeah.
feel like my network is just I've like made friends and just like met so many people through posting. And so
Totally.
those other sorts of things, yeah, like I think it sounds great that you've learned to block that out.
I mean, I wish I could say I block it out. I think that where I'm landing on is that I take it in and I go, great. Is it helpful? I
Yeah.
think one of the people I really love is Brene Brown. And early on, I remember there was a story where she gave a TED talk, and that was actually one of the first TEDx talk that like blew up her career. Before then, she was just relatively unknown. She was a researcher, and she talked about this. And again, Brene Brown, for those who don't know, is like the expert on vulnerability. She literally wrote, I would say, the book on vulnerability, but the truth is, I think she like wrote like 10 books on vulnerability. That's her whole brand. So she is somebody who, by all means, is an expert on showing up vulnerably.
Yeah.
But what I really loved about her is that she said that in the beginning, when she first posted or has saw her TEDx talk go live, she made the mistake of reading the comments. And then immediately that sent her into a spiral for several days. And then she said later on, what she learned was that the people who are commenting in the stands are not the same people who are willing to have a relationship and dialogue with you on the stage. So her focus became, who am I speaking to on the stage with me? Who is there willing to share in my vulnerability? And I think that mindset, and I'm just, that, by the way, that's not her quote. That's just my vision of how she would say it.
Yeah.
I think to me, that's so much more powerful. Because in this moment, I mean, whatever it is that we're sharing right now on this podcast or through, your posts and articles and the things that we've shared throughout the years, we will change. And I don't know if you ever picked up something that you wrote back in high school. And I'm sure a lot of people have got that experience, like dug up this, like their old journal.
That's yeah.
For me, it would be like those old MySpace or like, oh
Yeah.
God, like those old comments from there. And we all thought we were so deep until you reread it and you're just like, oh my
Right.
God, I
Right.
can't say that. But in the
Yeah. Yeah.
moment, it's real.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts around this, but really authenticity in the presence of being authentic is, do I feel grounded in what I'm saying it now? If I'm my only audience, if I'm writing for an audience of one,
Yeah.
who is that one person I'm writing for?
Yeah.
And how would they read it?
Yeah.
And that's all it needs to be.
Yeah. 100% agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Okay. So in the power of presence,
Mhm.
what's the biggest mistake that you think people make?
I think it's missing that second part of the equation, the where.
The where, right.
People
Right.
just don't think about that as much, but it has such a big impact.
Mm.
And this book is written for people who are like I was early on in my career, right?
Hmm.
Hardworking, ambitious, overlooked, but a lot of
Mm.
potential. And so you get overlooked because you're just focusing on the how and the where. That's again like
Mm.
the tree is falling in the forest and no
Mhm.
one no one is there to hear it. Like
Yeah.
then I mean you can only get so far with that. So
Mm.
yeah, the where
Right.
piece.
Got it. What other advice would you give yourself, that person you were all those years ago?
I think for me, knowing that I had to be my own best advocate was really, or I wish I had known that to be my own best advocate was really critical. I think
Hmm.
when you go through school and then you are in your early stages of your career, things like a path is sort of set out for you.
Hmm.
And you know, you have to work hard, you get good grades, you graduate high school, you go to the next step, and then you're in the working world, and it's like, okay, you're still sort of in that like executor mode. So you
Hmm.
still work hard. You
Hmm.
can, and I got a promotion, right, initially to start. But then when you have to move from that like mid level to senior leader, that's one of the hardest jumps that we can make in corporate America. And all the things that I'm talking about in the book are you know, you're already doing a lot of things well. How can we up level your presentation skills, your communication skills, your virtual presence skills, all these different things, your leading, the way you lead meetings, the way you lead teams, etc., to
Hmm.
be seen as a senior leader. And I think I wish that I had known how different it was and like the different skills that you need to get to that next level and essentially how you have to think differently. It's not just like, I'm going to keep pushing really hard, doing what I was already doing, but it's actually, oh, I have to start doing different things and approaching my career in a different way and talking to different people in order to reach that next level in my career. And unfortunately, a lot of companies, like you can have a really great manager, but it's just not something that's always taught or pointed out to you. And
Hmm.
so I had to learn a little bit the hard way. But then when I got to my next role, you know, loved my time at LinkedIn. And then I moved over to Prezi and I was like, I'm going to do things differently. I learned my lesson at
Mm.
LinkedIn and I got promoted to director after 1 year. And you can
Mm.
bet, actually, pretty early on when I joined, I had talked about wanting to get promoted because I joined as
Mm.
a manager. So,
Hmm.
you know, once I built that trust, I was like, I really want to become a director. What are the skills? I met with my manager every month. Like, what are the skills that you think I still need to get me to this point? How did you get to the point that you're at? Like, let me just
Hmm.
soak in all this knowledge and come up with a plan for how I can get to that point.
Mm. And when you're saying skills, what kind of skills were you referring to?
A lot of it was, I think, the softer skills.
Hmm.
So, how to do cross-functional collaboration well. And again, that a lot of it comes down to relationships.
Hmm.
How to advocate for my team,
Hmm.
perhaps, you know, skills around leading meetings with
Hmm.
larger groups and kind of keeping everyone moving in one direction.
Hmm.
How to speak up or like I have to like present more at all hands meetings so people
Hmm.
see my face. And again, where am I
Hmm.
showing up? All hands. Like that's a lot of visibility, right? Like
Hmm.
making sure I'm showing up in the right spaces.
Hmm.
I started writing a weekly newsletter, highlighting the things that my team did,
Oh,
wins,
wow.
learnings. Yeah. And like, of course, it's like not always you're like busy and it's not always a
Yeah.
fun thing to
I'm
have to
trying to
write
think of,
this.
wow,
And
like that's a lot of work.
it is a lot of work.
I'm
But
just
I
like,
was like, I'm taking control of the situation.
100%.
So yeah, and it wasn't just for me too. It's like I want my team to be visible as well, right? So
Yeah.
when you move to that higher level, it's not just about you doing the
Mm.
work, it's about also like how you can empower your team, for example. So there's just like
Mhm.
so many different things that you need to start thinking about.
Mhm. And a big part of that, of all those things that you talked about, I feel like the core theme is self-advocacy. Is how do I raise my hand in those situations, in meetings and all hands and all the things, online, offline, to be seen. And for those people who struggle with self-advocacy, is there anything that you found was practical from your experience during that time to kind of push yourself to show up a little bit more?
Certainly. For my introverts,
Hmm.
that newsletter, I loved that.
Oh,
I
so
like
good.
writing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like writing.
Yeah. Find your zone of genius.
I don't have
Yeah.
to talk to anyone.
Hmm.
Just write it, and then the whole company sees it. So that's like one approach, right? Like you said, find your zone of genius.
Did you just actually just like send it like CC the whole company email and being like, hey, I'm launching a newsletter to the whole team?
We had an internal like wiki, I guess, or like a what
Yeah.
do you call it? Internal wiki.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember like at LinkedIn we did something similar, but people were added to a listserv. And I remember asking my manager, I was like, oh, should I create a listserv for this? Like, how do I get the right people
Yeah.
seeing this?
Yeah.
He was like, oh, just post it to Honey. Like everyone will see it that way. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that works. So yes,
Honey is the listserv.
is the yeah, like the wiki
Oh,
like
okay. The
platform.
wiki. Okay, got it.
Yeah, yeah,
Got
yeah.
it.
So
Yeah.
so I did that. So yeah, everyone saw it, and then got good open rates too.
Was that scary at all for you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I had my manager read over the first few editions. So again, like lean on your manager. Like they know the
Hmm.
company, like they know sort of how to position things. They're in a higher position than you and have
Sure.
had this experience. So yeah, she would read it over, make like small changes. And then over
Hmm.
time I just did it myself and felt comfortable doing that. And
Hmm.
again, like especially when you're virtual, like you have no idea like what it's so much harder to get information about what's going on with their team. So the newsletter was really key.
Hmm.
Now, there are other things too, like it's not always just about writing, like you do need to speak up sometimes. So, for example, there are things you can do with the language that you use. So, there was this research done, published in HBR, that said if you use I language,
Hmm.
you're actually seen as more junior, whereas if you use like we, our, the team, like more collaborative language, you're viewed more favorably, like as a
Hmm.
more of a leader. So that should hopefully also
Hmm.
be good news for people who feel like, "Ooh, I don't want the spotlight on me." Like that is something
Hmm.
that you can do as well. And then I think something that I did with my newsletter is to really is to think about you sharing learnings and wins and mostly learnings really. It's like, hey, I did this thing and we learned this and this can help you too. So it's not like all about me, but it's like, oh, here's something we did. It like worked out great.
Hmm.
Here, like I want to help the rest of the company
Hmm.
succeed and do well and reach our goals. So
Hmm.
a lot of it, and I have a chapter on this in my book too, like mindset and
Hmm.
framing of things or reframing of things, right? So it's not like
Hmm.
me. Oh, I'm actually helping the rest of the team by sharing this information.
Hmm. What's one mindset shift, either in the book or from your own experience, that help you personally kind of step more into that perspective?
Definitely all the things I mentioned before, like become the
Oh yeah.
CEO of your own career, all of that.
Right. Yeah.
One other thing that I talk about pretty early on in the book is this concept of a career brand,
Hmm.
which is another way to say personal brand.
Hmm.
And that was a mindset shift for me too. Like, oh, I have a brand. Okay. I have to like think about this. Like what do I want my brand to be? What
Yeah.
is my brand?
Yeah.
And that was a huge eye opener too. Like, oh my gosh, like my brand is probably hard worker, heads
Hmm.
down, like nice to work with, good collaborator. I mean,
Hmm.
not all these are bad things, right? But like
So
but those are
relatable.
not yeah, those are not words that necessarily or often describe leadership, which
Oh,
would be more
100%.
like strategic,
Yeah.
I don't know, charismatic,
Yeah.
visionary, like whatever, you know? So
100%.
yeah, so knowing that you have a brand,
Yeah.
whether you are active or proactive about it or not, like we all have a brand already.
Mm-hmm.
Take control of it. How are you going to transform it, strengthen it? What do you want people to think about you? That was another big game changer for me. And if you're active on LinkedIn, that is a really great platform and vehicle to help strengthen and reinforce the brand that you want others to see.
Amazing. Um, is there any other questions that you feel like we've talked about or haven't talked about yet that whoever's listening, you're like, oh, this is such an opportunity for them to hear?
There's still a lot of other topics I cover in my book. I think
Go get the book.
go get the book and you'll find out. Um, one other thing I would say, maybe it's not like the sexiest topic, but I do have a chapter about how to lead better meetings.
Okay.
And meetings are meetings are such an opportunity
Hmm.
to build your presence, to strengthen your presence. meetings are super bad, right? As a whole. And so to be that person who knows how to lead a meeting well,
Yeah.
to get all the voices heard, to actually make sure that people are following through on what they say. Yeah, the chapter's short and sweet,
Hmm.
uh, but it's such a critical piece to our day to day. So I would just mention that as a call out for anyone who is wanting to build their presence. That's a wonderful way to do that, to start thinking about how you show up in meetings.
Amazing. I love it. So it sounds like there's tons and tons of stuff that we didn't have an opportunity to dive into, but they
Mhm.
could find all about to build their unforgettable presence really everywhere, not just how, but also where.
Yeah.
Speaking of how and where, how do we get your book and where do we find it?
Oh, you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
I'm like low key, I'm like low key happy I said that. I'm like, yeah, that was a
It was
nice.
I saw it coming. I was like, that's good.
Oh.
Okay. So all the major retailers
Yeah,
for books, and then
beautiful.
to learn more, you can go to unforgettablepresencebook.com. And if you pre-order, you get many pre-order goodies if you
Oh,
upload your receipt. So encourage all the listeners to do that.
amazing. Okay. So once again, we're going to drop that link into the show notes if you didn't quite catch it. And is there anywhere else that people can follow you, read about your stuff, learn from you aside from getting your book?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best place. So Lorraine K. Lee
Yeah.
is my handle. And yeah, hope to see you there in
Which
my comment
obviously,
section.
which
Yeah.
everyone, by the way, if you're listening to this and you want to get ahead in your career, you should be hopping onto LinkedIn right now, typing in Lorraine K. Lee and going commenting and interacting. Because remember, commenting is content.
Yes,
Brilliant.
I will respond and say hi back if I see you in my comments. So encourage everyone to, yes, please do that.
Do it. All right, beautiful. Thank you so much, Lorraine, for all the incredible wisdom that you brought
Thank
today.
you for having me.
This has been an absolute blast. Until next time, check out Lorraine's book, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.